start your engine.
Welcome to another episode of TNFro is Reading and Over 40 and Unapologetically Nerdy. I am broadcasting from my house instead of the infield of Daytona. I'm actually glad that I didn't go down there because evidently there is a delay of a few minutes or maybe an hour or so because they had a pop-up rainstorm. Doesn't surprise me because Chump and his trick wife, and I know that's actually disrespectful, but I don't care, actually opened the race. He hadn't been down. He's been in Florida for how many years now? Hadn't been to a race since 2001. And now he comes as a campaign stop on the opening of Daytona. Are you freaking kidding me? And I couldn't even watch the start. And then he takes a lap and gets in these guys' head on the most nerve-wracking ever was start of the racing season. This is going to go down, Jimmie Johnson is retiring. I had planned on just enjoying this start of the race, and then there comes Chump 45. That actually should be like a malt liquor drink because it'll kill you if you keep listening to it. But anyways, I had to get that off my chest because I'm pissed off that this guy has come and ruined the opening of the race for me. But besides that, there's been so much that's been written about it that I'm actually going to be commenting on in the show, including an article on the front page of the Sunday New York Times talking about NASCAR and the dwindling attendance and viewership, and everybody's retiring. I think, as I said, 48, Jimmie Johnson is retiring. I'm thinking Haverick is next, and probably a couple of the other old heads. So this is going to be my opportunity to look up more things about the history of the race, participation and non-participation of other African Americans besides Bubba Wallace, and just in general why a cisgendered straight female, African American female at that, is just so enthralled with this sport. And yes, it is a sport. And join me as I post intermittently throughout the 500 race, because yes, that is 500 miles of left turns, as my friend said, one of my nurse friends actually said. But it is very, very exciting. Some of the best crashes, some of the highest speeds. It is absolutely the coolest. So join me as I nerd out and in my mind do donut and burn rubber on Daytona stage. So while we wait out this rain delay, it's not lost on me that after Chump 45 gave the sounding bell and got into the racers or drivers' heads, that it started raining. So now we have another delay. So, anywho, just saying. So as we wait out this rain delay, I was doing one of my most favorite things on Sunday is reading the New York Times. And one of the articles by Victor Mather, it states, once king of the road, NASCAR sputters. And I'm not sure if that's true because in my mind, NASCAR is still probably one of the best car races besides Indy as well as Formula One that there is. And this sold out crowd at Daytona, it's like 200,000 people between the infield and in the seats that are there for the opening of NASCAR. And even in spite of the big names like Jeff Gordon, Tony Stewart, Dale Earnhardt, Jimmie Johnson, Danica Patrick, all retiring, I think there's going to be the next several years with all of these young guys coming up as the old guard moves on, that makes the race ever more or even more exciting. I didn't realize that the race itself has been on an upswing, even with Danica Patrick, who in her 4 years of racing, she never won and finished almost dead last in most of in her seasons, but she did bring positive energy as well as a certain cachet to the male-dominated sport. And after the initial excitement, even to Bubba Wallace starting the race, starting out as the first full-time black driver since the 1970s, he just has had 4 top 10 finishes and he's not won a single race. And I haven't seen, even if Daniel Suarez even qualified for this race, which team is he on this year? This is a guy of Mexican heritage. I don't know if he went back to Mexico and he's racing down there, or he just could not land on another team. And I thought he raced better than evidently Ricky Stenhouse. Ricky Stenhouse got fired from his team and he's landed somewhere else. Where's Daniel Suarez? So it does point out a lot of the inequities in the sport, but it also points to that the sport itself is going to be also going through growing pains with the changes in the rules. As always, the second race at Daytona has been moved from the 4th of July to later on in the field, as well as they're adding different manufacturing. So the car is going to be making big changes next year. And there's Bubba. Bubba's looking good. Who's his sponsor again? Mac Tools. He parachuted in. Oh, I ain't mad at him. I am so not mad at some Bubba Wallace. He's growing up and growing into his finest and not that dorky dude from Durham. So this is actually, I think, this season, which is not only Jimmie Johnson's last season of racing, but also the last season in this type of car. I think it portends to great changes and more growth in the sport itself. It's great where you can't become stagnant because there's always some shift to actually garner more fans and get more fans, just like me. Again, I'm a cisgender, straight African-American woman who loves NASCAR. And I know I am not the only one that can be used to hype up the sport, especially if all the drivers look like Bubba Wallace. I'm just saying. So now, the other change I wanted to make mention of, the NASCAR is simply going to be called the NASCAR Cup Series. They're not going to be posting up and advertising like they did in years past, like the Winston cigarettes, as well as the Monster, which is the energy drink. It's just going to be NASCAR. So they're moving in the realm of taking back their brand, as well as changing the cars themselves to become more of very, very fast stock cars. So I'm actually really, really excited about that. Again, the sport can only get better as some of these positive changes coming forth. So now that I have kind of stopped yelling at the TV, I'm still mad of Chump 45 ruining the NASCAR experience for me by being the Grand Marshal. Grand Dragon, maybe, not Grand Marshal, just saying. Anyways, I'm calmer that we have a rain delay and I get to look up more things. I'm going to start this segment after my, belligerent rant about Black excellence and celebrating Melissa Harville-Lebron. She is the first African American woman to own a bona fide NASCAR team. Her team, E2 Northeast Motorsports, is defying all the odds. NASCAR itself is a generational sport, from what I understand, where it's built on families, and has become known as a sport of the South. Good old boys with the rebel flag and now MAGA hats. But she is actually from New York City, a single mom and African American. When people told her she was crazy and she wanted to show her sons that this sport was more dangerous and more impactful than their video games, as well as just watching it on TV. She took on the challenge after doing her research, and the creation of E2 Northeast was that although they have yet to qualify for a truck series race, she is confident that she'll get there. That, in addition to sponsorship, because that is how you get to race. Their rap is actually pretty cool, as you can see from the picture in my notes. But what allows you to continue the race, to hire the crew, to keep the car upkeep, everything that goes into a bona fide garage, and spotters, even in the truck series. And that's another thing people don't understand. NASCAR is split between two. It's not drag racing or just straight up stock car racing, which it has been known for. There's a whole truck series where these dropped, very fast trucks are actually just as fast and probably just as popular in the NASCAR world as the stock car race. She is making inroads in that, and she is a phenomenal woman within her own right. So during this Black History Month, I celebrate Black excellence and honor Melissa Harville-Lebron, who is making inroads in a race dominated by white males. Big ups to you, Queen. So welcome back to the conclusion of this episode. Well, the entire Daytona 500 has been delayed until tomorrow at 4 o'clock, according to a good friend of mine, Marianne. When you get Chump 45, the ultimately destructive malt liquor, becoming your grand dragon marshal of the Daytona 500, you're going to get 3 rain delays, and you're only going to get 20 laps in before y'all have to call it. However, it does give me more time to look up other instances of Black excellence for the NASCAR circuit. And this just goes out. Just because Kanye supports you doesn't mean you're not a racist. Just saying. So I actually found out about Wendell Scott when I visited the NASCAR Experience, or the NASCAR Hall of Fame in Charlotte, a few years ago. Mr. Scott began his racing career in local circuits and attained his NASCAR license in around 1953. And he actually had to sneak to get that, because being the racist time that it was, they weren't really giving out those licenses freely. But it did make him the first African American ever to compete in NASCAR. He debuted in the Grand National Series on March 4th, 1961 in Spartanburg, South Carolina. What's the racetrack at Spartanburg? Darlington, I think. On December 1st, 1963, he won a Grand National Series race at Speedway Park in Jacksonville, becoming the first black driver to win a race of NASCAR's premier level. Scott's career was repeatedly affected by racial prejudice and problems with the top level NASCAR officials. However, his determined struggle as an underdog won him thousands of white fans and many friends and admirers among his fellow racers. He was posthumously inducted into the NASCAR Hall of Fame in 2015. He was born in Danville, Virginia. From boyhood, he wanted to be his own boss. In Danville, there were two industries that dominated the local economy: cotton mills and tobacco processing plants. Sounds kind of like North Carolina and Tennessee, doesn't it? Scott vowed to avoid that sort of boss-dominated life that mills too much like a prison. He told a friend, "You go in and they lock a gate behind you and you can't get out until you've done your time." This was, I think, a quotation from his autobiography, Hard Driving. He began learning auto mechanics from his father, who worked as a driver and mechanic for two well-to-do white families. Scott and his sister Gilda were awed by their father's daring behind the wheel. "He frightened people to death," Gilda said. "They say he come through town just about touching the ground, kind of like a Corvette over 60. After Scott started racing, all the old people would say the same thing. He's just like his daddy." Scott raced bicycles against the white boys in his neighborhood. "I was the only black boy that had a bicycle." He became a daredevil on roller skates, speeding down Danville's steep hills on one skate. He dropped out of high school, became a taxi driver, married Mary Coles, and served in the segregated army in Europe during World War II. After the war, he ran an auto repair shop as a sideline. He took up the dangerous, illegal pursuit of running moonshine, which actually was really funny because I always go back to my grandmother, the bootleg. I wonder if he was one of the suppliers of her in Virginia. This trade gave quite a few early stock car racers, such as Junior Johnson and Big Bill France, their education in building fast cars and outrunning the police. The police caught Scott only once in 1949. Sentenced to 3 years probation, he continued making his late-night risky ones. On weekends, he would go to the stock car races in Danville. Scott was around 30 when he was sitting in the bleachers of the local speedways watching white men race. Up to then, he had lived his whole life under the rules of segregation. Charlotte High Point, they said, yeah, he went out there and they would not let him race. But he snuck through the side door after one of the not so high up on the chain granted him a license to race, and he went on to win. And then in 1961, he moved up to the Grand National Series. In the 1963 season, he finished 15th in points. And on December 1st of that year, driving a Chevrolet Bel Air he purchased from Ned Jarrett, he won a race on the half-mile dirt track at Speedway Park in Jacksonville, the first and to date only Grand National event won by an African American. Darrell Wallace Jr., maybe Bubba Wallace's relatives, recently became the second African American driver in NASCAR's top 3 series to win with his 2013 Kroger 200 win at Martinsville. Or is Darrell Wallace Jr. or Bubba Wallace? Maybe that's it. Anyways, Scott passed Richard Petty, who was driving an ailing car with 25 laps remaining for the win. I actually saw him, and I think I have a picture of him too. Scott was not announced as the winner of the race at the time, presumably due to the racist culture of the time. Buck Baker, the second-place driver, was initially declared the winner, but race officials discovered 2 hours later that Scott had not only won, but was 2 laps in front of the rest of the field. it only would take 47 years later for his family, that means Mr. Scott's family, to get his trophy, but it was after he had actually died. So this goes back to the reason why I still love a sport that really doesn't know what to do with us. And Wendell Scott exemplifies the greatness of the sport. He would tow his car around, get turned down, and they wouldn't let him race. They actually went so far as telling him, oh yeah, by the way, let some white boy drive the car that you had built from the ground up, that you had no national sponsorship, but let somebody else race it. Nah, bro, that's not going to fly. And it would take me until almost 6 o'clock to realize that the race that I was actually watching was the 2019 Daytona opening day, and the actual race itself is not supposed to drop until tomorrow at 4. But I'm actually okay with that. I don't know what I was expecting, that the race was actually on Fox, which is dominated and probably owned by one of the subsidiaries of Chumps Enterprises. But I'm not going to let that ruin a sport that I actually like. And even though people like Wendell Scott and LeBron's family was actually kept out, and it is a struggle to participate in a race that doesn't get and doesn't know how to take people that don't really look like the master race. I guess that's on that field, but at the same time, we still will enjoy a sport that doesn't know what to do with us. So, hats off to Mr. Wendell Scott and every other Brown, like Daniel Suarez and Bubba, that actually go on that track and risk their life every single day to entertain cranky people like me. And probably will I actually be sitting at the postponed version of Daytona 500? Yeah, probably. Will I be planning on going to the race next year? Yes, I probably will. And will I actually go at least to maybe one or two races this year? Maybe Darlington, Talladega, the Coca-Cola 600 in Charlotte? Probably, just because I'm right around there. And maybe the races in Atlanta. Who knows? I'm just excited about the beginning of the race season of 2020 this year, and I hope you will be just as excited as I am. And as I always say in my published podcast, I love Writer's Block Coffee, and this race between NASCAR and my podcast are my outlets for creative freedom, as well as my personal therapy. But you don't have to struggle if you don't have this type of outlet, this doctor on demand, as well as other modalities that you can actually use. You don't have to suffer. You don't actually really have to suffer alone. You can reach out every single day, 1-800-273-8255, to a certified counselor, because you don't have to take your own life, because that not only takes you out of the race, but it will potentially plunge your family into despair because they couldn't help you. If vodka's the problem, dial 1-800-662-HELP. That's 1-800-662-4357. And it's actually TalkSpace and Doctor on Demand that can actually help you. If you drop me a line at TennesseeFroIsReading@gmail.com and it's non-trolly, I will probably read it on air. But you can also leave a non-trolly message at 423-463-0658, and I will read it and give you big ups on air, and even drop you some pod beans, golden beans, if the message is actually read on air. If you are tired of being a freeloader and you want to become a patron, I do have actually one patron at this time, but if you want to become the second one, drop me a deuce at, not poop, but actually money, at patreon.podbean.com/the talking fro, or you can leave me a tip at paypal.me/Felicia DAI. And as always, even though one of my favorite sports, NASCAR, was actually postponed until tomorrow, I hope you will enjoy my musings as well as my rants today as I watch what I could of the race. And I hope you enjoy this publication as much as I have enjoyed creating it. Thanks.